I paid for my son's engagement party. His fiancée's father stood up at the head table and toasted to me in front of 80 guests. To Cole's father, a man who still shows up to events smelling like a job site. At that very moment, the man sitting quietly at the corner table, the one I hadn't noticed all evening, set down his glass and walked toward the microphone. Follow this story to the end. I promise it goes somewhere you won't expect. The party was at a place called Harrington's Steakhouse in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of restaurant where the menus have no prices on the ladies' side, and the sommelier speaks in a whisper. My son's fiancée's family had suggested it. I'd agreed without asking what a meal there would run me, and when I finally looked it up 3 days before the event, I sat at my kitchen table for a full 5 minutes just staring at the screen. But Cole was happy. That was what I kept telling myself on the drive over. Cole was happy, and his girl Brooke seemed like a decent person when she wasn't standing next to her father, and that had to be enough. I'd put on my best clothes, the charcoal blazer I'd bought for my wife's funeral 14 years ago, pressed and cleaned, a new shirt underneath it. I'd scrubbed my hands twice with the gritty orange soap I keep by the shop sink, got most of the black out from under my nails. Not all of it. When you work with steel the way I have for 30 years, some of it stays with you. It becomes part of the texture of your skin, the same way certain years become part of the texture of a life. I walked into Harrington's at 7 o'clock on a Saturday in October, holding an envelope with a check inside that represented 6 months of careful saving. Cole and Brooke's engagement gift. Enough to cover the security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment in the city while they got their footing. Brooke's father was already there, standing near the bar when I came through the door, holding a whiskey glass and talking to 2 men in suits who laughed at everything he said. I'll call him by the name I came to know him by that night, the name I've used in my head ever since. His name was Harmon Whitfield, a commercial real estate developer from the western suburbs who liked the sound of his own voice and liked even more to make sure you knew it. He looked at me when I walked in. His eyes went from my face down to my hands and back up again, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite rudeness. Worse than that. Indifference. The kind of look a man gives a parking attendant. Cole came rushing over, lit up the way he used to when he was small and I'd come home from a shift. He hugged me, and I could feel how much that night meant to him. I held on to that feeling through the appetizers, through the cocktail hour, through the introductions that went the way those introductions always go when two families don't quite belong to the same world. Cole tells me you work in construction, Brooke's mother said, in the way people say construction when they mean something else entirely. Ironwork, I said, structural steel. I've been running my own small crew out of Joliet for about 12 years now. How interesting, she said, and turned to refill her wine. I found a seat near the back of the private dining room and watched the evening unfold like something I was observing from behind glass. Brooke's family filled the center of the room, 3 generations of lawyers, a cardiologist, a woman who ran her own wealth management firm. They moved through the space the way people do when they've never once had to wonder whether they belong somewhere. I didn't belong, but I'd paid for the room. The dinner was good. I'll give them that. I ordered the ribeye and ate slowly and tried to be present, tried to remember that none of this, the white tablecloths, the crystal, the waitstaff in black, none of it was the point. Cole was the point. Cole, who had grown up sleeping in a 2-bedroom house on the south side of Joliet while I worked overtime to keep the lights on. Cole, who had never once complained. Cole, who had turned into a man I was genuinely proud of. Then Harmon tapped his glass with a butter knife and rose from his chair. He was the kind of man who liked to make sure the room was watching before he cleared his throat. He took his time getting upright, took his time smoothing his jacket, took his time picking up his champagne flute. He'd mentioned his commercial real estate portfolio at least 4 times already that evening, in 4 different conversations, always casually, the way wealthy men mention wealth when they want you to know it without appearing to try. I want to say a few words, Harmon announced, about this young couple and about what family means. People settled. Cole smiled over at me from the head table. Brooke squeezed his hand. Harmon raised his glass and his eyes found mine across the room. To my future son-in-law's father, he said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man accustomed to owning rooms. A hard-working man. A man who still, even on a night like this, carries the honest marks of his trade. He paused. Let a smile form slowly, the way people do when they're very pleased with themselves. I understand he actually debated wearing his work jacket this evening, so we should all consider this an upgrade. To Cole's father, a man who still shows up to events smelling like a job site. We appreciate your effort. Laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. The polite, embarrassed kind that fills a room when nobody has the courage to stop it. The heat came up in my face fast. 80 people in that room and 80 pairs of eyes swung toward me the same way they do in every nightmare where you're standing somewhere in clothes that don't fit. My hands tightened on the edge of the table. I looked at Cole. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, face completely closed. Brooke had gone still beside him. Neither of them said a word. That silence, not Harmon's toast, not the laughter, but that silence, was the thing that nearly finished me. I thought about Ellen, my wife, gone since Cole was 16. I thought about the night she was diagnosed the second time, when we both understood that second time meant something different from the first, and how she took my hand in the hospital and said, "Just stay in the room with him, okay? Whatever else falls apart, just stay in the room." I had stayed. I stayed through every game and every school play and every morning he needed a ride somewhere, even when staying meant leaving a job site at noon and losing half a day's pay. I had stayed in every room my son needed me in for 30 years. And here I was, staying in this one. I should tell you something, because it matters for what's coming. I was not always just an ironworker. When I was 23, I graduated from Illinois Institute of Technology with a degree in civil and structural engineering. I had job offers. I took one that let me work on a bridge project in St. Louis that I still drive over sometimes when I'm out that way. That still gives me a feeling I don't have a clean word for. Then Ellen got sick the first time. Then she got better. Then we had Cole. Then she got sick again for real, and everything I'd planned quietly rearranged itself around what actually had to happen. I left the engineering firm when Cole was 2. The hours weren't compatible with being the only available parent. I got my journeyman certification, worked the high steel. You climb the bare skeleton of a building while it's still just columns and beams, 70 feet up, sometimes more, and you bolt and weld it into something that will stand for 100 years. The money was good. The schedule was mine in a way a salaried position never would have been. The ideas never stopped. I'd come home from a site with my hands shaking from the torque of the guns we used, and I'd sit at the kitchen table after Cole was asleep and draw in notebooks. Connections, load distribution, a specific kind of fall arrest attachment I kept thinking about, because I'd watched a man on a job in Schaumburg take a 20-foot drop that the standard issue gear should have caught but didn't. I spent almost 3 years developing a solution, ran it by an old IIT professor who owed me a favor from years back. He told me to patent it. I said I didn't have money to patent anything. He said he'd help cover the application costs and we'd work out a licensing arrangement between us and whatever business partner we could bring in. That was 18 years ago. I didn't tell Cole. I didn't tell anyone. The patent approval came in the mail in an envelope that looked like a phone bill, and I read it twice at the kitchen table while Cole ate cereal across from me and talked about his baseball team. It felt abstract, theoretical, like something that had happened in a parallel version of my life. A company out of Cincinnati called about a year later. They'd found the patent, wanted to license the design for their full personal fall arrest line. I signed papers I barely understood, through a man named Alan Faust who my professor had connected me with, and who handled the business end of things. The first check arrived and I stared at it so long Cole asked me if something was wrong. I told him it was nothing, just some back payment on an old job. The checks kept coming. I kept working. I kept showing up on job sites in the morning and coming home at night and raising my son. The money went into accounts I rarely checked. Alan managed it with my loose, casual consent, updating me a few times a year in phone calls that I usually took while sitting in my truck in a parking lot somewhere between jobs. I trusted him because there was no particular reason not to and because I had no real capacity to manage it myself. It was a good life, honest work, the kind where your hands know what they did all day. None of it had prepared me for sitting in a steakhouse in Naperville, listening to a man use me as a punchline in front of my son. I noticed him when the laughter from Harmon's toast died down. He was sitting 2 tables to my left, alone near the edge of the private room, nursing what looked like club soda. I didn't remember seeing him arrive. He was roughly my age, maybe a few years younger, lean, wearing a quiet gray suit. He hadn't laughed during the toast. He was watching me with the focused expression of someone doing a careful calculation, not pity, something more deliberate than that. When our eyes met, he gave me the smallest nod. I had no idea who he was. The evening continued. Harmon held court. Cole and Brooke cut the engagement cake and took photographs with her family. I ate the slice of cake that was brought to me without tasting any of it. The man in the gray suit didn't move, didn't mingle, didn't speak to anyone. He just watched. Occasionally he glanced at his phone, then looked back up at me. About 40 minutes after the toast, he stood up. He crossed the room with the unhurried walk of a man who is never in a hurry because he doesn't need to be. He stopped at the small podium near the bar where the microphone had been set for toasts, and he picked it up. The room shifted without quite knowing why. Conversations tapered off. People turned. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. His voice was calm and even. "My name is Alan Faust. I'm an associate of the guest of honor's father, and I have a few things I'd like to add to this evening's remarks." Cole looked confused. Brooke leaned toward him and whispered something I couldn't hear. Harmon's face tightened. He opened his mouth. Alan raised one hand gently, barely, and Harmon went quiet. "Some of you work in construction or manufacturing," Alan said. "Some of you don't. Either way, you've probably never thought much about how many people die on American job sites from fall accidents. The number runs around 300 a year. It was higher before certain equipment standards changed. He paused. In 2007, a patent was filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office for a redesigned fall arrest anchor coupling, a component that connects a worker's harness to the fixed anchor point while they're working at elevation. The design solved a specific mechanical failure that existing equipment had under lateral load conditions, a relatively simple fix once you saw it. Elegant, actually. The kind of solution that makes engineers wonder why it took so long. Alan let that settle. That patent belongs to Cole's father. The room held its breath. I manage the licensing portfolio for that patent through our partnership entity. In 18 years, the design has been licensed to 14 manufacturers operating in the United States, Canada, and the European Union. It is now incorporated into ANSI Z359 fall protection compliance standards. Last year alone, royalty income across the original and two derivative patents, both developed independently by Cole's father, was just under $400,000. Somewhere in the room, a glass made a sound against a table. The assessed value of the portfolio in our associated holding company, Alan continued, is currently just over $9 million. Cole's father holds 60% of that equity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I want to be clear about one thing. He has known about this for 18 years. He chose to keep working. He chose to keep his crew employed and keep showing up in the morning because, and I'm quoting something he once said to me on the phone, "It's honest work and I know how to do it." He didn't tell his son. He didn't move to a bigger house. He saved for 6 months to pay for this party tonight. Alan set the microphone back in its stand with the same quiet care he'd lifted it with, and he walked across the room to my table and sat down. "I'm sorry I didn't warn you," he said quietly. "Cole called me last week and asked me to come tonight." He didn't explain why. I think he'd been worrying about how the evening would go. I looked across the room at Cole. He was watching us. He gave me a look I recognized from years ago, the look of someone trying to communicate something he doesn't have the words for yet. He had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. He had called Alan without telling me. He had tried, in the limited and imperfect way that sons do these things, to make sure I wasn't completely alone in that room. I sat with that understanding for a moment, let it settle. Then I pushed back my chair and walked to the head table. Not to Harmon, he wasn't worth the walk. I went to Cole. I put my hand on my son's shoulder and I said quietly, close enough that only he could catch it, "We need to talk. But not tonight. Tonight you enjoy your party." Cole grabbed my hand and held it for a moment, the way he used to when he was small and I was taking him somewhere he wasn't sure about. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and pulled out the envelope I'd brought, set it on the table in front of him. "That's still yours," I said, "because I wanted to give it to you, not because anyone at this table earned it." I straightened up. I looked at Harmon across the candlelit table. He looked back at me with the expression of a man who has just learned that the furniture he's been leaning on is structural. "Thank you for the toast," I said. And I walked out. That was 11 months ago. I'm writing this from a rental house on the Oregon coast, 7 blocks from the water, where the mornings smell like salt and wet cedar, and I've been sleeping past 7 o'clock in a way I don't think I managed since I was in my 20s. Alan talked me into taking leave from the field work. 6 months, he said. "The crew knows what they're doing. The portfolio runs itself. Try it." He was right. They do, and it does. Some mornings I drive into town just to feel useful, to talk to someone who knows the difference between a structural bolt and a carriage bolt. There's a hardware store run by a man who makes terrible coffee and gives good advice about deck stain, and I've been stopping in 3 mornings a week. He doesn't know anything about patents or royalties or ANSI standards, and the conversations are exactly right because of it. Cole calls every Sunday. He called 2 months after the engagement party to tell me that he and Brooke had talked, several long, uncomfortable conversations, and that she had asked for my number. I told him to give it to her. She called on a Tuesday evening. She cried for the first 3 minutes, which I hadn't expected. When she got herself steady, she said, "I didn't say anything because I was embarrassed, and I've thought about it every day since, and there is no version of that's okay, and I'm sorry." I told her I appreciated her saying it. Then I said, "Here's what you need to understand about your father's opinion of me. It never actually changed who I am. I've known who I am for a long time. I was hoping you and Cole would figure it out too." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm starting to." I told her that was a good place to start. Harmon has not reached out. I didn't expect him to. Some people are exactly who the worst moment reveals them to be, and there is no version of that evening Harmon can reframe into something flattering. I don't carry particular ill will toward him. He is simply not someone I want in my life, and now we both understand that, which saves us both a considerable amount of pretending. Cole and Brooke are getting married this coming spring. Out here on the coast, actually, because Brooke found a venue online and sent me photos and wrote, "Dad, would this be okay with you?" The first time she called me Dad was the day I understood that we were going to be all right. I'm paying for the wedding. Alan offered to pull it from the portfolio and I told him no. I want to pay for it the way I've paid for everything in my life. From my own account, by my own hand, earned in a way I recognize. The number doesn't frighten me the way it once might have. 18 years of royalty income will do that to a man's relationship with numbers. Cole drove out here last month, just him, just a long weekend. We went fishing on a reservoir about 40 minutes inland, badly, the way people fish when they're not really trying to catch anything but need something to do with their hands while they talk. We sat in a rented aluminum boat while the sun moved across the water, and we talked the way fathers and sons don't always get to, slowly, without anywhere in particular we had to arrive. At some point he said, "Why didn't you ever tell me about any of it?" I looked out at the water for a moment before I answered. "Because I wanted you to be proud of me for showing up," I said. "Not for what was sitting in an account somewhere. There's a difference." He nodded. He was quiet for a little while. Then he said, "I was always proud of you, even before I knew about any of it. I was proud of you that night at the party. I just didn't move fast enough." I didn't say anything back. Sometimes the right response to something is simply to let it land completely. We fished for another 2 hours and caught nothing, and it was one of the finest afternoons of my life. 31 years of steel and elevation and honest work. A son who became someone I genuinely like spending time with. An idea I held on to long enough for it to mean something. And a night in a steakhouse in Naperville where a man who confused money for character tried to make me small in front of 80 people. And I stood up, said what needed saying, and walked out into the October air. The parking lot smelled like wet leaves and cold asphalt. My truck was where I'd left it, third row back, the one with the dent in the passenger door I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes before starting the engine, hands resting on the wheel, the way I used to sit after long days when Cole was young, and I needed a moment before going inside to be the father he needed me to be. Then I started the truck and drove home. There's something that happens when you stop spending energy on managing other people's perception of you. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't arrive with any announcement, but gradually the effort you used to pour into that particular work becomes available for something else. I don't know yet exactly what I'll do with it. I've got some notebooks around the house with ideas in them. The engineering brain never really went quiet, just got patient. But for the first time in longer than I can recall, I'm genuinely curious to find out what comes next. And maybe after everything, that's the thing most worth having.